So I wanted to take a minute today and circle back around to a topic that we discussed somewhat during Newswave this week, and that has to do with Nintendo and the ongoing conversation around what has become their most successful platform to date. The numbers do indeed back that up, and while it hasn't reached the same number of units sold as the DS, it passed it in a very critical category. But can the Switch become the best-selling platform ever created? Well, we did actually get a slight response from Nintendo around their plans for the next year, and it does have me questioning if they're actually going to get there. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you like it and subscribe if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel. So if we take a look over on Nintendo's investors page, we can see it's currently sitting at 125.62 million units sold. It just got done its best fiscal year ever for a system, really going into now into its 7th year, but its overall 6th complete fiscal year. It's the best we've ever seen for a system. And even though it did miss its expectations by just a touch, they did revise down from 21 million down to 18 million, and they still kind of missed by a couple 100,000 units. However, this year coming up, they are projecting 15 million for the fiscal year that we are now in. That'll run until the end of March, which would place them, as we can see, right, a little over 140 million. That would be a decline still of about 16% year over year, and this past year was already down over 20%. So they're definitely on the other side of that bell curve that we typically see for a console's lifespan, because eventually you either run out of interest in the system or you run out of people to sell it to. I mean, you get to a point where, do you need to buy another Switch if you already have 3 of them in your house? Now, if you compare this to the PlayStation 2, that was 155 million, the DS 154 million, and those were interesting snapshots in time. The DS obviously caught fire, especially with the DS Lite, and it just continued to run. The PS2 was at a great point in time because it was when DVDs were really breaking onto the scene, and the PS2 was a great DVD player for the price that was also had great games on it, a ton of variety, and became the default system very quickly that generation. But Nintendo is in very rare territory here with its current setup with their hardware, especially when you look at the software crossing 1 billion units. It is their most successful platform ever made. It's the only one they've created that has reached over 1 billion units sold. And think about this, that software number does not include Tears of the Kingdom, that we all know is going to do really, really well. And then from there, you have Pikmin, which not going to be on the same level of Tears of the Kingdom, but will probably account for a couple of million units, Metroid Prime 4, and most likely a few others being thrown in there that, well, again, not on the same level as Tears of the Kingdom, will probably still contribute millions and millions of more software to it over the next couple of years. Now, Nintendo themselves have said that this goal of 15 million for the year will be a stretch, as in, I think they are expecting to have to revise down, and I feel like they are going to do that at least once, possibly twice, depending on how sales continue for the Switch. It's very possible that it could start to fall off a cliff here as we go, and that's something that happened to them with the Wii. I mean, the Wii was lightning in a bottle for them, but they waited too long, and I mean, when they fell off a cliff, they plummeted. It was almost a straight line down when they got later on in the lifespan of it, and I have wondered from time to time if that same thing will happen to the Switch. But I guess when you have games currently like Tears of the Kingdom coming out with those kind of reviews, yeah, there are people who may actually pick up a Switch right now just to play that game. But there is something interesting from Nintendo that they had mentioned, and this was during their conference call that they had, where they at least gave some information ahead of they'll do a more formal Q&A when they have the gathering of the shareholders next month in June. They do that annually, and that's, for example, when the person paid allegedly like $40,000 in shares to ask about games like F-Zero. We'll see a bunch of questions being asked. We'll get official translations for it. And I'll tell you now, they're absolutely going to be asked about the aging Switch hardware and if there are plans to replace it anytime soon, because there's a lot of hype, a lot of money to be made when they launch a new platform. And I'm sure the shareholders who like money and having their dollars obviously accrue value and all of this as the stock goes up, wants to ask about those revenue generating opportunities. But Another aspect is, how are you guys going to get to 15 million units sold this year when we're into it the 7th year for the system? Well, Furukawa did rule out one strategy that was certainly coming up a lot, and that has to do with dropping the price on the Switch. Doesn't seem like that's going to happen, and I did think about this a bit as people were sort of throwing that out there because of the current landscape right now with the economy, exchange rates, and all this. I don't know if Nintendo is actually in a position, as weird as it sounds for how old the hardware is now, to necessarily drop the price and still align with their overall business strategy, which is they like to make money on their hardware. They do not like selling at a loss, and it's in complete contrast to what we hear about from Sony and Microsoft, where they will sell at a loss initially and make it up in the back end with the software, especially from third parties, because Nintendo relies so heavily on first party and the manufacturing and all of this of their hardware to go along with it. They try to make money day one. And we can see Furukawa says, with regard to hardware prices for certain materials having fallen, but overall costs remain high, we must also continue to account for the impact of factors such as inflation and foreign exchange rates. Production was highly impacted during the previous fiscal year, so we are ensuring our parts procurement occurs far enough in advance to ensure stable production. Even if raw material prices decrease, it will take time for this to be reflected in manufacturing costs. Currently, there are no plans to reduce the price of our hardware during this fiscal year. On the other hand, while we also have no plans to raise prices, the yen continues to be weak and procurement cost remains high, so we will continue to monitor the situation carefully. Basically, the strategy of lowering prices, say the OLED model down to 300, maybe the red box to 250, and could they push the Switch Lite below 200? That's kind of out the window now, as they're essentially just going to ride this out the rest of the fiscal year at the current price point. At least that's their position now. Things can change. They can revise plans and all of that as they go through. So with that kind of being put out of the picture now for a potential price drop to push more units, the other thing is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and if that could actually push enough units along with Evergreen software to get the Switch to that point. And I guess it's possible, but I don't know if Tears of the Kingdom will move the needle for the next year, because I just feel like everyone who wants a Switch, for the most part, already has it or is looking at the Switch in its later life cycle and saying, you know what, if I buy it now, a year from now, the new one may come out. And it's hard to really argue against that, because I do believe we are getting into that, as they mentioned, uncharted territory, but also the point where we start to hear murmurings of the next system. And there was a story from Bloomberg around Sharp, who appears to be part of R&D for, as they said, a game console coming up here in the next, they say year or so. And while it could be Sony's remote play device, wouldn't shock me if Nintendo is talking with Sharp about procuring parts for their next hybrid system that would need that screen. I think Zelda is going to do some crazy numbers when it comes to software, and in fact, I think it will break records and become the best selling, or at least the fastest selling Zelda game, and depending on how they approach cross-gen and potentially upgrading, maybe through a patch, this Zelda game for the next system, and might even use it as a way to show off what the next system can do for a game that people are very familiar with here, but still kind of fresh on people's minds. I think it could definitely be part of the advertising for the next system. So in that case, they'll probably sell Tears of the Kingdom like outright and in stores as being a big time title for them for the next 7 or 8 years. And at that point, yeah, it probably will become the best-selling Zelda game of all time, but will it move hardware like we saw with Breath of the Wild? Probably not, because Breath of the Wild showed up when the Switch did. Nintendo has also mentioned that they have not factored in any kind of new hardware releases for this 15 million forecast. So once again, they can revise up if they decide to announce a Pro model or even a Switch Lite OLED. Or maybe they do move to launch next gen within this fiscal year. But at this time, doesn't appear like they're communicating that to investors, which means we probably won't see the next system from Nintendo launching before March 31st, 2024. I actually wouldn't be shocked if we end up holiday 2024 when it is officially released, but they would probably announce it 7 or 8 months ahead of time. At least I'd like to think they would, to give enough time for marketing and then making the rounds with it, doing all the different demo events and press previews and all of this. And then obviously manufacturing and, as Furukawa has said, procuring all the parts. And to me, the scenario that would get the Switch to the point where it is the best-selling console of all time, passing the PS2 at 155 million units, is if Nintendo does not launch the next-gen system until holiday 2024, and there is roughly a 2-year cross-gen period from the Switch to this next device, because at that point they would almost make it 10 years. And I mean, the Switch could still kind of stick around as that cheaper alternative, because the OLED's $350 now. I feel like Nintendo's next system will probably minimum be $400, especially in the current economic climate. So, hey, that Switch Lite for maybe a kid or something, for like a parents looking around for a couple of cheaper systems, that might be a good selling point. But to me at this time, kind of looking where Nintendo is and how they've been talking about this current fiscal year that's just started, I think the Switch will probably get to the mid 140 million range, 145, 146 or so, and then kind of tail off there. And unfortunately, for people who wanted to see history made here with the Switch, probably won't reach the PS2 or the DS, unless Nintendo does something wild and is like, here's a Switch Pro, and we're sticking with this thing for the next 4 years or so. Then sure, eventually they would pass the PS2 and the DS. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Will the Switch really defy all odds and get to the PS2 and the DS, even passing them, becoming the best-selling system of all time? Or do you think it will start to kind of tail off here as we get through this current year? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.